Hi everyone, welcome to another aec+tech talk. I'm Niknaz, founder and CEO of aec+tech. So excited and happy for this conversation. So aec+tech is a platform where we feature the latest and greatest tools and technologies in the AEC space. We've been organizing these aec+tech talks as a space where we discuss real-world applications of all these great products that are coming to AEC market every day. So we hear about AI all the time. Everybody's talking about it, and everybody is asking, is it really being applied in practice, or are people just talking about it? So that is exactly what we're going to explore in this conversation with three wonderful speakers that we have today. So I'm just going to briefly introduce them, and then we'll let them talk more about themselves and their work and their projects. So today we have with us Daniel Bolojan, founder of Versur.ai, who is building agentic AI solutions for the AEC industry. We also have JD Zogg from KTGY, who brings the perspective of an architect actively integrating AI into design practice, and Robert Jimenez from NORR, an AI strategist, helping shape firm-wide AI adoption and implementation. So wonderful to have you all. With that, I'm going to hand it over to JD. JD, please share your screen. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your work, and tell us how AI has become part of your everyday practice and your profession.
Yeah, so thanks for having us. Can everybody see my screen? Just to make sure. Niknaz, can you see my screen?
Yes, you can see.
So just a little bit about myself. I'm an architect at KTGY in lower density multifamily, and I'll show a couple pictures of what I do, and then I'll get into more AI-centric talk. But a lot of three-story townhomes and range of two-story, three-story products. That lower density multifamily product is what I specialize in, and on the design side, so front end work. So range of areas and locations, but mainly Southern California is majority of the work. And then I'll jump into more of what I'm excited about in the AI space. And this is just a way to explain it. This is not the actual tool, but I built out a quick presentation to talk through and show a more visual look on what I'm doing. And really the focus recently has shifted away from task-oriented things and focus more on a full systems approach. So essentially what I've tried to do is build my own internal company with a bunch of different agents with different tasks that can go and then do those things, because I found that specializing in specific tasks is way more beneficial in thinking about the overall system and how those components all play together. So essentially, I'm the architect CEO of this company, and then I have a chief of staff, and then I'll have departments under that chief of staff that help with specific tasks. And I'll talk through a quick use case as well. So then a lot of it's about building your file structure and your tree of, what's being registered, what's calling to what, going back and forth, what are the protocols in between these agents, and just like you would think of internally at an architecture firm is, who are the code junkies, who are the strong designers that care less about code, and how do those two work together. So, I mean, essentially you're building files, and that agent is referencing those files, and you're consistently updating those files. Everything's built through Claude Code for the most part. Obviously, there's calls to other things and other tools. But thinking about what is the easiest way for me to just go ahead and ask a prompt, but it's very directed on where that information's going and what it's calling to. So yeah, I've built 9 different departments, and I'm just building as I'm going. So this will change over time and rebuild. And one thing I think is important with AI and why it maybe hasn't been super useful for a lot of people, and there's a lot of AI doomers, is the hesitancy to actually build things without a roadmap, kind of start building rather than thinking about exactly what you needed to do and giving up very quickly. You should just start building stuff and start learning how to implement it and go back and forth. So yeah, built a couple different departments. Each has a head agent that runs the show. So, I mean, the goal is to be able to take a site and essentially take it all the way, through a design proposal pretty quickly and with little integration, just questions back and forth. And, at some point we'll probably live in a world where prompts kind of run our entire workflow. So this is a quick mock-up of just how they work together, where they're coming from, just, a quick visual to take a look at. And then some of the departments have been built out more. That's a lot of, because that's what I do specifically. So you end up having a lot of sub-agents. As you can see, these little boxes are those sub-agents. And this is kind of how I envision it in my head. This is a floor plan, every department, they all sit together, right? So mentally, I'm going through those exercises. Recently, obviously, with Fable 5 coming out, its model ability has gotten a lot better. So being able to work through SketchUp and build different feasibility studies in 3D within a couple minutes. I actually did this one this morning, so you can take a look at feasibility studies even quicker. And that was coming from this. That was also built through Claude Code, and then this was fed into to Fable to actually go and do the modeling. So that step-by-step process is something that I'm developing over time. And then where do you take that? So I built out a visuals department that are built on LoRAs, so they follow a specific scheme. So if you want that more realistic approach, you can, and I'll show in a slide or two what that looks like. So yeah, on the left you're seeing what the model has built, and then on the right you're seeing finished images with very little human interaction. And then these are just a couple of the visual styles. And building a LoRA takes obviously a good amount of time on the back end of marking images, building a good enough pool of images to pull from, but then you have your visual styles built for reuse. And then also one thing, I don't necessarily love reading about code all the time, building out your code skills and making sure that you're constantly iterating with updates on code. And I have an agent that's always tracking that. So yeah, couple different design teams. Athena, I name them after Greek gods because it's an easy way to do it. And then you have these sub-agents that are for specific tasks. Like one I've been using a lot is Hue. It's color and materials, and we'll pull from a SketchUp model and build out a whole color and materials board. And a lot of it ends up helping you take something from 0 to 80 or 90%, and then you still have to do the extra 20, 10% to get it across the finish line. Code team, Nemesis, obviously, like I was saying, I'm on the design side, so sometimes code isn't my best friend. So you build out, based on whatever codes you're using a lot, CRC, CBC, and in my case, and obviously accessibility, 11A, 11B stuff, and consistently going back and forth with it and pushing its ability to understand the code and interpret it the way you would interpret it. Brand team, render team, right? You can constantly go back and forth with strategy in building a brand for yourself. And then, yeah, so wrapping it up with those core departments. And I end up using, this is a way for me to explain it. I end up usually just going into Claude Code and asking questions rather than, directing it. This is just a way to structure the files. It makes it more fun, more iterative. And I find myself going back to it over and over again and fixing it. So yeah, and I think that's close to my 10 minutes. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
Thank you, JD. This was super exciting. So are you now using it on real world projects in the office?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay. Is anybody else using it, or is just you for now?
No, and that's, I think Robert's going to get into probably some of that. It is difficult to think about. I mean, if you think about a company in general, the best idea is to try to make everybody 10 to 15% better rather than making one person 100% better, right? When a company our size, almost 400 people, you really want to make everybody 10 or 15% better if you can do that, which is still a consistent struggle with AI. I think most people probably listening to this and, speaking in this call would agree. So we're still working through those kinks for sure.
Got it. Thank you so much for sharing. So I have a couple other questions I'll ask you. We'll get back to you at the end. Thank you. So we'll go to Daniel next. Daniel, can you share your screen and tell us about your work?
Let me know if you can see the screen.
Yes. Yep, we can see.
Correct. All right, so I'm mostly going to just give an overall view of Versur. And I'm not going to go in all the details just because it's a massive kind of project at the moment. But the way you can think about Versur is, let me just make sure I have the latest. Okay. Actually, before I talk about Versur, so just a bit of my background. I'm currently an associate professor. I'm teaching AI in architecture. Before being a professor, I used to work with Blau in Vienna. Currently, I'm still working with them, and I'm developing for them AI. So we've been implementing AI in practice since roughly 2017-18. So that's where I developed for them a network that we call Deep Blau network. And we are looking at, like different kind of ways of how to integrate AI. So here we are not, in that office, we are not really looking so much at the idea of, language models and agents and so on. We really develop our own models for, massing and 3D models, image models, and so on, yeah. And just lately, about 1 year ago, is when I started in a way to look into developing for the industry, developing tools for industry. So that's where I started developing Versur. So what Versur is, it's a composable agentic AI platform that allows architects and designers to turn design thinking into executable systems. So what that means is instead of prompting a single model, what you can do is you can build structured workflows composed of specialized agents that can analyze, generate, evaluate, and iterate across design processes. And what that means for an office that uses Versur is they can construct and their internal kind of workflows and turn them into units of intelligence, something that we call units of intelligence that can be then executed from any kind of instance or interface with very minimal coding required. Yeah, like it was explained before, like a lot of architects, we don't really have a lot of coding experience. And then for me, I'm looking at this aspect of how can we bring, in a way, agentic AI and AI mostly into the practice and make it very easy for architects to build things rather than always relying on there's another chatbot that I have to subscribe to, and then that chatbot I have to connect it to something else and so on. How can they build their own internal kind of tools without having to write code? So here then, we all know that the hard part in any kind of firm is not that we don't have the knowledge. All offices, they kind of have the knowledge. The hard part is that all this kind of knowledge lives in a way in different kind of spaces or places. So some knowledge is in the emails, other in folders, other on boards, in threads, and a lot of it is just like in people's heads. And the decisions from last week, for example, might be in a way like lost, or what the client actually care about, like that information can be lost, or it's just in the head of one principal or something. Yeah. So when a new project starts, you always have this kind of issue of if somebody joins new, you have to somehow introduce them to all that knowledge. But again, a lot of that knowledge is somehow informal. It's not even like a formal kind of format. So how exactly can we then bring this kind of fragmentation into something that we can actually work? So what Versur is also trying to do is he's trying in a way to turn the intelligence of the office into something that can be operationalized. So what that means is that we can have perhaps agents or different kind of like types of computational tools plus workflows that can enable that kind of intelligence to be operationalized, meaning that we can execute it run it and so on. So one aspect here that is super important then to this story is this idea of Versur Brain. So what the Versur Brain is the intelligence layer in an office. And think of it as almost like a cognitive memory for the practice, where you can have projects, people, decisions, meeting notes, and how those things connect. And it's pretty much what the office or the firm knows and how it decides or what it decides. So you can ask it like real questions, and it can come back with answers like that are factual. They're not just hallucinations. You can also embed like different kind of information as videos, images, audio, text, and then it can also like connect to different kind of integrations that your office kind of works with. So this is also raising this kind of question, and a lot of the development of Versur pretty much goes hand in hand with practice. What I mean by that is there are a couple of practices that are currently working with Versur in the beta. And a lot of the features that I'm implementing are as a feedback in a way from those practices. And a lot of like people had this kind of question about like what's happening with our data, like who owns the data. So are we uploading the data? Are we sending the data in a way in the cloud? So all these kind of features of Versur allowing you to connect to your own kind of storage device, storage kind of systems. If you have like Drive or other kind of Ignite or other kind of systems, Versur allows you to connect to those, and like that you don't have to worry about like where your data is. Yeah. Now what Versur also has this kind of mode of a dream mode, and what the dream mode does is pretty much overnight the system should be able to look over all the information that it ingested, and then it should be able to almost like self-heal and realize where there are issues, as in like there are some contradictions perhaps in some data that was uploaded. Maybe there's some missing information that is relevant that has to be uploaded. So like that you always have a sort of system that is keeping up to date in a way. Now, talking about this kind of idea also of data, a very important part here is this issue of data governance. And not only that, but also like the models that we are using. And ironically enough, like, when we work with Claude Code and these kind of systems, if in the era of social media, we were tricked to give away our personal information just by logging into a social media account, it feels that today we are tricked to give away our skills of how we do things to these kind of systems, yeah, and without being too doom about it. But a lot of offices, and especially enterprise kind of clients that Versur has, they raise in a way this kind of question of like what's happening with our data. So we are connecting to the brain, and we are connecting our entire storage in a way to the brain. Will these models have access now to our proprietary data? And for many of them, that's super problematic, yeah? Because pretty much what you're doing then, you're just sending every single query that you do to OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, every query pretty much you're sending in a way that knowledge to them. So then here what Versur is trying to do is trying to give you the option in case that as a practice, those aspects of governance are very important to you. Then Versur allows you also to connect to local models that you can run on your computer. So in that way, you have your own local storage, or you have your storage somewhere, and then you have your models that you can run. I can talk about this, but probably we are too short on time to go too much in detail. Now, another aspect that is super important in Versur is this aspect of how do you build the workflows. And a lot of architects, we do know already from building Grasshopper tools and definitions, we all know that those are not the most friendly kind of ways of operating and building in a way tools. And Versur has probably the same kind of challenge, just because it's a node-based kind of interface that you can build your own workflows. But here what you can do is you can have an agent that then builds the workflow for you, and you can interact with it, and you have that workflow built. Now, why we opt for a sort of a workflow and not just a prompting? Because what's happening with a lot of like models is every single time when you're going to ask a model something, you're going to end up with slightly different kind of outcome. And if you want to have some intelligence that you can execute and keep on running again, for example, if I'm developing, like in this case, a workflow for competition, and what that means is that I should be able to read the knowledge base, I should be able to read the brief, I should be able to have an agent that is able to analyze the site, run different kind of feasibility studies, and then how is proposing a design, then how is evaluating design, and so on. That's a sort of workflow and process that you want to have it more predictable than every single time when you're asking the agent to generate something new. So then Versur allows you to build these kind of workflows. You can build the workflows using the Versur agent. And then later, these workflows, they can be then deployed. So the way these are being deployed, they are deployed in something that we call Versur Studios. And this is the reality of practice. And this is also like the reality that myself, working with Kopion in Vienna for the past like almost 10 years now. Always when I was developing for them tools that were quite advanced, no one was kind of integrating and using those tools, just because it was so hard in a way for a normal architect to just use those kind of tools, yeah? Unless you're a super user, many of them were not using it. But in the moment where we start to package in a way like tools and try them to present them interfaces that are very, very simple. Even people from the back office, they start in a way to ask if they can use those tools. Yeah. So then here, what Versur allows you to do is allowing you to have this little option where, as a practice, you might have a couple of super users, maybe they are B managers and so on, that they're already like, they have a sort of inclination toward technology, and they can develop these kind of tools. But once you develop those tools, you can develop tools for, let's say, a design team, and then deploy those tools only for a design team, and only the design team can have access to those. And then what you can do, you can develop tools for project architects and deploy those to project architects. So in this way, then you have multiple kind of studios that your practice has, and those studios, they're very easy then to interact with, rather than having to interact with a kind of node-based, let's say, interface. Yeah. So in the end, the idea here with Versur allows you to build your entire kind of studio memory by starting with developing the brain of the studio, the knowledge base, and then from there, like, which are the workflows. And when you start to combine these together, that's when you start to have something that we call operationalized intelligence. And what we mean by that is the fact that you can really execute workflows that are reliable, and not every single time when you run it, you end up with a different kind of hallucination. So I'm going to conclude here, and I'm looking for the conversation after this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Daniel. It's so amazing that you are bringing your research and your theoretical background into practice, building Versur. And I see Versur as something that can be used by not just architects, but also engineers, contractors. So have you thought about it? Are you also working with professionals outside architecture?
Yes, so I cannot say the names of the enterprise clients, but there are certain enterprise clients that Versur has currently that are not architects at all, and they're not even like designers, and they already start in a way to look at, okay, we can do this. And for many of them, like, what's fascinating, this issue of like, how do we maintain a certain quality across different kind of countries where we operate. And when they looked at this kind of idea of like, okay, you can build the intelligence and then you can deploy it. So suddenly they looked at that as, we can have a standard that is respected now across different kind of offices that we have and different kind of countries. Yeah. So for sure, like currently, I would say, yes, I'm an architect, and probably I'm first talking with architects about Versur, but there are already like people that are looking at Versur that they're not architects, and they're not even engineers. They're just different kind of domain. Yeah.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. So Robert, you're next. Or is all yours.
Yeah, let me share my screen and let me know if everyone can see it. Everyone can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so it actually worked out nicely that I was at the end, because I'm compiling basically JD and Danielle's ideas, because of so my premise really is just as like an AEC AI strategist, really, and just a little bit of background on me. So I've been in architecture roughly for like 18 years now. I've spanned some smaller firms, like smaller teams within like five people, and up to where I am now, which is roughly like, I think, plus 800. So I've had the opportunity to kind of see the different project types, different topologies of the different firms, how they operate. Obviously, a small firm operates completely different than a bigger firm. So I've had that blessing to be a part of all those different types of sizes. It wasn't just a linear for me for architecture. I've always been in architecture, but it was roughly like 7 years. I actually had my own startup, and it was in the commercial software hardware industry, and it was specifically for and smartphones, and it was really focused on modular for smartphones at the time when Google was coming out with it. We were one of the first developers, third-party developers that were kind of entering the ecosystem and creating similar to apps, like an app store, but it was more of a hardware store. And in that role, I was the co-founder, but I was really also the product manager. So I was able to kind of have different insights of what was going on in the industry at the time. I connected with different, industry leaders, different people from Google, as well as the biggest one towards the end of our startup was really when we were partnering with, actually really speaking with Motorola when they were talking sort of doing the whole modular smartphone situation there and kind of creating different modules for that. So I had the ability to kind of see how products come together, also kind of the engineering teams, how they come together as well. It was a really amazing how no different it was from architecture and construction. Same big team, same goal. I think it was just the differences, and when it comes to software, you can sort of iterate faster, but in hardware you can't. So it was almost sort of similar to a building. So that kind of gave me the ability to kind of reinforce that concept of it really. And that's really kind of what brought me into it, kind of evolved my career into where it is now. So right now I'm actually working for NORR, and they're a very big AE firm, and 800 plus staff, 13 sectors, and they span different projects. Some projects are very sensitive, so whether it be like the defense or anything that has permission issues, all the way down to the retail, commercial, industrial level. And then I also sort of this is somewhat recently new that I've created my own, this Origin Point Lab. And that's really what that is just to take all the findings and sort of take the knowledge I had when I was in my previous startup and bringing it into a sort of a lab that I can put all my prototyping in. So it's really just kind of me prototyping different local executions. I'm experimenting a lot with how AI can work in with the AEC market, specifically using open source models locally. Being the fact that it's very difficult to the pricing on a lot of these consumer models and GPUs in the industry right now. My lab is really trying to figure out ways to use efficient open source lab models to be able to run on very simple computers. This way we can kind of maybe use both. We can use stick to frontier models, but at the same time, when kind of like what Daniel was saying, when you want your data to be private, you can run that locally and not lose that quality that you would get from Frontier, which is actually pretty possible from our testing. It's really just the harness, exactly how how Daniel's kind of setting up his, and JD same thing. They're both creating that's really just the harness, and that's really what's doing a lot of the orchestrating as opposed to the model itself. So the model itself is getting its reasoning layer, which kind of helps, but it's really that portion of it. So that's kind of what we're really with Origin Point Lab, what I'm creating sort of to help with the prototyping. So this is just kind of like overview of what's going on, and it's no different again from what JD was saying as far as from adoption perspective. And one of the main reasons I had sort of created the Origin Point Lab is really just because, as you can see here, it's like a 6% usage really is what's going on in the market right now. So a lot of architects are using this, but it's very, very minimal. The rest of the 60% is really just like experimentation. So it's no different from kind of the reason why I created that, and it's really my idea is to move those prototypes fast into the daily core. And so really to do that, you really kind of have to touch on really the specifics of what it is exactly we're trying to touch. So in being architecture is very complicated in a sense. It's got a lot of moving parts. We have to work with consultants, sometimes 30 consultants, a contractor, an owner, internal teams as well when you're working with a big firm. So it's really kind of hard to kind of get everybody in the same perspective. So the big thing would be just to kind of focus on the things that are repetitive. So the things that can actually be given to AI, but even with then just with a human in the loop. So really that's kind of what I'm focusing a lot on right now, is a lot of that is that middle part, which is really like the admin and the docs part, a lot of the data part. The biggest really is like knowledge bases is something that you see a lot of right now, especially with us internally as well. We're using really experimenting and really using that knowledge base to kind of capture all the knowledge we have. But we have, as you can see, we had 13 different sectors. So, across those 13 different sectors, we do have communication between teams, but the teams are very busy. So, one team is running with one project or 5 projects, and sometimes other teams are not aware that maybe the project might be going on. So this knowledge base kind of helps kind of unify that whole knowledge base in there. So that's something that's been very helpful. But as far as adoption is concerned, it's you're seeing a lot of different tools, and I've seen a lot of people approach us as well as to try these different tools, and it's like throwing sort of a kitchen sink at it. It's like all these different all of these different things in it. The biggest problem that is that in order to create an adoption, adopt it within a firm, it's the friction point. So we have different architects on staff, project managers on staff. Some of them are very technologically comfortable, other ones are not. So it's really just about kind of working the way, really keeping the tools within the ability for the person to keep using use those tools, but within the softwares that they're already comfortable with. So that can come also with some issues. I know there's there are some products out there that kind of allow you the ability to move for different sources, but just like any other business, they want to kind of retain your knowledge and retain that portion of it so you can keep coming back. So that's something that's tough to deal with, but that's just part of the industry. But I think the real push there is really going to be along the lines of just keeping it within systems that we're already using, as architects or project managers. So that's kind of really what we're working with here. And as far as the kind of what we're doing for shooting for the adoption portion of AI, which is very difficult because there's a lot of people who don't trust it, a lot of people are not comfortable with it, and other people just don't want to have 50 screens open at the same time to make to work within these ranges. So I'd like to just kind of break down in like 4 different pipelines really of how AI can really be almost like a co-pilot to the architecture industry and an architect or project manager. And it's really just perception, imagination, reasoning, and communication. So, the perception being, we as architects and project managers, we have to read, interpret, codes and constraints. Those are all no different from AI pattern recognition. So, AI can actually do that. But it actually do it at a faster pace. I think more along the lines of we have to feed it the correct data. So I think at the end of the day, these tools are great, but really what they really need is the data. And if the data, and it's the industry is very famous for having data be basically very unstructured. We have emails, we have calls, we have meeting minutes, we have drawings, we have specs. I think just kind of joining that all together is what really kind of helps give better insight to architects and make it a little bit faster, and then make our workflows a little bit faster, which also increases our productivity. So that's something that's great. We can also use it for spatial forming concepts as well, like can iterate daytime, modeling, mass modeling, parking lots, building forms. That's very helpful as well. Performance and structure, and as well as budgets and constructability. That's something that's good too. That kind of falls along the lines of same thing I was kind of talking about before regarding, being able to do massing models for specific locations. And, before most of those jobs and workflows would take a long time between consultants, and some of these things can happen instantly now too. And then also communication, which is what I just mentioned before, having emails and phone calls and meeting minutes all kind of scattered, kind of bringing that all together. So there's some context engineering going on there. So the agents know what's going on. It's not that they're just going to continue to hallucinate, which is, a big problem in the industry. And I think something that we fear as well. So, we could skip these. This is kind of just overall. So so I think right now, as far as I think we started out as more just like a chatbot. I think we're kind of right now in like tier 2, tier 3. I think the goal is really that tier 3, which is we're going to have an agentic ecosystem. Really, it's going to be these different agents, similar to what JD was discussing, that can reach out and and pull data, different from what Daniel was saying as well, and just putting it all together. So and then delegating the work. So you're going to have some of these agents that are specialized in specific areas, but they're able to pull the data centrally from the firm, as well as delegate to another agent. And then at the end of the day, all this becomes one ecosystem that's able to enhance the productivity of the architect, which obviously increases billable time too, which is really the outcome overall as a firm. So I think these are the things that come in mind. But I think the biggest thing is going to be really kind of keeping it in the middle. I think there's a lot of firms that I talk to as well that that are interested, and I kind of help them with these different strategies, and they're more like, let me just wait and see. I think that's a problem. I think if you wait and see, by the time it becomes something tangible, it'll be too expensive to get to. I think even from a perspective of just training staff, and then software. Software gets expensive. I believe Autodesk from 20 years ago from now is completely different. 10 years or whatever. So it's something that just to keep in mind. I think adopt everything is something that is slightly dangerous as well, because there are some issues with AI being, hallucination and lack of data. If you're not really trained in giving it data, that's going to be a big problem. So that's kind of one of the reasons why Origin, Point Labs is something that I would like, that I kind of created in a sense, because you can safely do your experimentations in that adopt everything area. And you don't bring it into that middle or bring it into the firm until for a fact it's low risk, workflow for everybody that's in it. So that's basically just kind of the overall gist of it, and I'm just basically summarizing up exactly what JD and Danielle were talking about. And it's really, that's kind of what I'm seeing a lot of, especially as working within the field still as a project manager. There are some automation items that could be done that would speed just productivity altogether. It's just a matter of just getting there, just getting the firms to adopt it and getting the people to sign on it. So.
Wonderful. So you have great points and around AI adoption. So you mentioned that when it comes to like new tools adoption in the office, so you usually prefer to stick with what everybody is already comfortable with and is already using. So when do you decide if that capability and feature exists in the current tech stack that you have, use a new tool or in-house?
Yeah, so like saying, as far as when do we decide to bring it over to the firm?
Yeah.
I mean, usually it's more along the lines of it has to pass different departments. Obviously, safety is a big thing, especially it ranges from small firms to big firms. We could probably I've seen smaller firms, or we can I can adopt a feature very quickly, even if it's in a different pattern, or even if it's in a different workflow. They're more open to it, to sort of just kind of get their feet wet in it. Bigger firms are really a little bit more strategic. We have to make sure it abides by with the safety of just the IT infrastructure, and just this different thing that come into play. So I think really the decision comes probably within a team, where we all sit down and say, when we pilot something first, and we say, okay, look, this is this pilot worked. There was an increase in productivity here. Really, it's important to try those pilots on, I would say, measurable projects, but low risk. So we want to make sure that we don't put it on a big project that if it fails, it's going to be catastrophic. So it's something more along the lines of just a lower risk. If we see that it's good there and it adopts perfectly there, I think it becomes more along the lines of telling the team, let's make almost like a standard operating procedure. This way, everyone kind of knows how to rate the feature, and once they start using it, they can kind of say, okay, this is not what it's supposed to do, and as opposed to kind of what JD said, just kind of giving it up, which we'll see sometimes a lot of. We'll just say, I don't want to work with this. This is a waste of time. It's really just kind of have to have everyone sign on. So I would say it's like a team effort to really call the go and no go for some of these features. At least that's what I'm seeing. So.
Thank you. So we have about 5 minutes for some questions. So to audience, please feel free to post your questions if you have any. I'm going to ask the question this is a question for all of you. So when do you think the biggest gap when it comes to tools and AI? So the gap between what all this promise to do everyday practice, especially for small and medium firms that are the biggest percentage of the firms, at least and also larger firms. So and then how technology directors, those that are inside the office in charge of adoption, expediting this adoption, how we, overcome it. So we can start from Jay.
Can you repeat the Can you repeat the first part, because you were breaking up on my end?
Oh, sure. Sorry. Yes, yeah, definitely. So the biggest challenge.
Okay.
What they actually do. Practice.
I think you broke out again, but I assume the question is kind of talking about the biggest challenges in adopting AI in general.
Yes, yeah. Apologies for my internet.
What I see is one of the biggest issues is adding 25 different tools and expecting people to open up more and more new tools, and learning a new tool every week is just a recipe for disaster. So trying to figure out, how do you make something that's already built in the existing infrastructure, how can you make from point A to point B 20% faster, 20%, maybe not even faster, just better for the user, that's somewhat seamless and already integrated into the system. So you're not making people completely change how they think about the process every week or every couple of months, even every year. For people that have been working 20 years is a lot to have them reiterate their whole process that often, because there is so much work to get done. And we know as architects how many hours you work a week on average. And it's not like we have a ton of free time to be testing new tools. So I think that's probably taking an integrated systems approach rather than, hey, this task, we can use this tool for this task, and think about it as how we've been thinking about technology as applications, right? Get away from applications and more towards integrations into the existing infrastructure, I would say, is probably how we need to approach things, but commonly isn't. So.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I see that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kenya.
Go ahead. No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying. Yeah, it's yeah, that's pretty much true. I think it's just natural too. I think that it's something that's seems to be an afterthought a lot from firms. I mean, we'll be maybe working, we're comfortable in a specific format or specific program, and then we come along and say, when it's too late already, we're like, okay, we need to implement this because we need this. We need to do this. We need to render. We need to do whatever. And it becomes an afterthought as opposed to something that is more an integrated thought before we get to that problem. And then what happens when really what happens with that is, you start using all these different tools. And then once you kind of step back and realize, because just like JD said, we probably have maybe an hour, 2 hours in a day, maybe if we're lucky to actually think about these things. When you ever look back, you're like, oh, wait, I'm using like 5 or 6 different tools. And it really should be something that is thought about early in the process of how these are all going to integrate together, especially when it's a bigger firm, when you can't really kind of just connect things because some things just aren't, certified to be integrated. So I think that's something that's a problem too.
Yeah, on my end, like I see in a similar way, because and that's why probably also my approach with Versur is not about like just another chatbot. It's about like, for example, in Versur, if you want to create a workflow that does, let's say, zoning analysis, well, you can have just zoning, let's say, yeah. But at the same time, you can create a workflow where you say, I'm going to do zoning, then I'm going to connect it to a Grasshopper tool, and then I'm going to have now an agent that runs both the zoning and the Grasshopper tool, yeah. So like that, in a way, I'm always thinking of it like trying to build the infrastructure rather than having just another tool. Because like what's happening, like right now, it almost feels that for any kind of computational tool that we have out there, it's almost like we are trying to bring on top of it a AI tool, yeah. And I think that's just overcomplicating things. It's not increasing the complexity of the work that we are doing. It's just making things more complicated, yeah. So I think it needs to have for the integration to actually happen, you need to have like a sort of infrastructure layer that the office has, and then that interaction with that layer has to be so banal and so simple that it doesn't matter if you have technical expertise or not. You should be able to work with it. I do not believe necessarily in the logic of vibe coding, to be honest, just because I know vibe coding is great for practices if you you just work with very localized kind of solutions, and you are trying to solve certain problems. But once you try to apply like this kind of vibe-coded kind of solution to a bigger office, you might end up with big headaches. And we all know, like, I don't know if you heard of the issue with Amazon AWS, where somebody pushed like a vibe-coded kind of code into AWS, and suddenly they took down AWS. And that's the kind of problem, the kind of risk that you're exposing yourself then. So yes, you can use vibe coding, as an individual, but probably not at the organizational kind of level. Yeah. Once you reach it there, you need to have something that's kind of an infrastructure for everyone to use.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. We're at time. So I would like to thank you again for joining us and sharing such insightful thoughts and sharing generously your work and your knowledge with our community. So have a great day. Don't forget to join our next talk coming up next month on August 22nd with another 3 wonderful AEC tech leaders in the industry. So this conversation was recorded and will be saved on our YouTube channel. So have a great day and see you all soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.